simple hiking trip would lead to a nightmare. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how I came face to face with a Wendigo. It all started when my friends, Jake and Lisa, suggested we explore the dense forests of northern Ontario. They were seasoned hikers, always seeking the thrill of uncharted paths. I, on the other hand, was a novice, but their enthusiasm was infectious. We packed our gear, loaded up on supplies, and set out on a crisp autumn morning. The forest was beautiful, with the leaves turning shades of red and gold. We hiked for hours, the fresh air filling our lungs and the sounds of nature surrounding us. As the day wore on, we decided to set up camp by a serene lake. The water was so clear, reflecting the vibrant canopy above. That night, as we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, Jake mentioned the Wendigo. "It's an old legend," he said, his voice low and serious. "A malevolent spirit that can possess humans and turn them into cannibalistic creatures." Lisa laughed it off, but I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something unsettling about the way Jake described it, almost as if he believed it. We eventually retired to our tents, but sleep didn't come easily for me. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig had me on edge. The next morning, we packed up and continued our hike. The trail grew narrower and the forest denser. The vibrant colors of the trees seemed to darken, casting eerie shadows. We hiked in silence, the mood much heavier than the previous day. Around midday, we stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. It was old and decrepit, with vines crawling up its walls and the windows broken. Jake, always the curious one, suggested we take a look inside. Reluctantly, Lisa and I agreed. The cabin was musty, filled with the scent of decay. We found old furniture, tattered and covered in dust. In one corner, there was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. Jake picked it up and began to read aloud. The journal belonged to a trapper named Samuel who wrote about his encounters with a strange creature in the forest. The creature was tall and gaunt, Jake read, his voice trembling. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its hunger was insatiable. It whispered to me, driving me to the brink of madness. We exchanged uneasy glances, but Jake insisted it was just a story. We left the cabin, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed darker, more oppressive. As night fell, we found a clearing to set up camp. The air was heavy with tension, and our conversations were strained. After a quick meal, we settled into our tents, but sleep eluded me once again. Around midnight, I heard it, a distant, haunting wail that echoed through the forest. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, but there was no response. I unzipped my tent and stepped out, the cold air biting my skin. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, and the forest was deathly silent. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Jake, his eyes wide with terror. "It's here," he whispered, his voice shaking. "The Wendigo." Before I could react, a chilling howl pierced the night. I turned to see a towering figure at the edge of the clearing. It was exactly as the journal described, tall, gaunt, with glowing eyes. It moved with unnatural speed, its eyes locked onto us. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him towards Lisa's tent. "We have to run," I urged. We woke Lisa, who quickly understood the gravity of the situation. We grabbed our backpacks and fled into the forest, the Wendigo's haunting cries echoing behind us. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest becoming an impenetrable maze. The Wendigo's cries grew fainter, but the fear never left us. We eventually found a small cave and decided to take refuge there. Exhausted, we collapsed onto the cold, hard ground. Jake was the first to break the silence. "We're not going to make it," he said, his voice devoid of hope. "That thing, it's hunting us." Lisa tried to comfort him, but her own fear was evident. "We'll find a way out," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "We just have to stay together." The hours dragged on, and the darkness seemed to close in around us. My mind played tricks on me, every shadow morphing into the Wendigo. I could hear its whispers, a low, insidious murmur that filled me with dread. Jake began to deteriorate first. He grew paranoid, accusing us of plotting against him. "It's the Wendigo," he would mutter, eyes darting around the cave. "It's getting inside our heads." I tried to calm him, but the fear and exhaustion were taking their toll. Lisa and I decided to take turns keeping watch, but sleep was a luxury none of us could afford. One night, as I sat by the cave entrance, I heard it again, the Wendigo's wail, closer this time. Panic surged through me, but I couldn't wake the others. I stepped out, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was silent, too silent. Then I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the trees. My heart raced, and I stumbled back into the cave, my mind consumed by terror. The Wendigo was toying with us, driving us to the brink of madness. By the fifth day, we were barely holding on. Jake was a shadow of his former self, muttering incoherently and refusing to eat. Lisa and I were exhausted, our nerves frayed. We knew we couldn't stay in the cave forever, but the thought of venturing out was equally terrifying. As dawn broke, we made the difficult decision to leave. We packed our meager supplies and set out, the forest oppressive around us. Every step was a struggle, every sound a potential threat. We hadn't gone far when the Wendigo appeared, blocking our path. It was more terrifying up close, its eyes burning with malevolence. It let out a bone-chilling scream, and Jake snapped. "No more," he shouted, rushing at the creature with a wild look in his eyes. The Wendigo grabbed him effortlessly, lifting him off the ground. Lisa and I could only watch in horror as it tore him apart, his screams echoing through the forest. In that moment, something inside me broke. I grabbed Lisa's hand, and we ran, adrenaline fueling our desperate flight. The Wendigo pursued us, its howls growing louder. We stumbled through the forest, tripping over roots and branches. Finally, we saw it, a road, a lifeline in the darkness. We sprinted towards it, the Wendigo hot on our heels. Just as we reached the edge, I felt a searing pain in my leg. I fell, turning to see the Wendigo's claws digging into my flesh. "Go!" I screamed at Lisa, who hesitated for a moment before running. The Wendigo's eyes bore into mine, its breath hot and rancid. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate. But then, a blinding light filled the forest. A car screeched to a halt, and I heard voices shouting. The Wendigo recoiled, its grip loosening. I felt myself being pulled to safety, the creature's wails fading into the distance. I woke up in a hospital, my leg bandaged and my body aching. Lisa was by my side, her face etched with worry. "We made it," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "We're safe." But I knew we would never truly be safe. The Wendigo's whispers still haunted my dreams, its glowing eyes a permanent scar on my memory. We had survived, but the forest and the Wendigo would always be a part of me. In the end, the Wendigo didn't just claim lives, it claimed souls. And though we escaped its clutches, the fear and darkness would linger, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just beyond the light.
My name is Sarah, and I'm a wildlife photographer. My job has taken me to some of the most remote and beautiful places on Earth, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in the dense forests of British Columbia. It was the summer of 2022 when I received an invitation from an old college friend, Mark, to join an expedition to capture footage of the elusive Sasquatch. Mark was a cryptozoologist, obsessed with the legend of Bigfoot. Along with his assistant, Tom, we set out to the forests near the Cascade Range, an area notorious for sightings of the creature. Our journey began with high spirits. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves. We hiked for hours, following trails that grew fainter as we ventured deeper into the wilderness. By late afternoon, we found a suitable spot to set up camp near a stream. That evening, as we sat around the campfire, Mark shared stories of Sasquatch sightings. People describe it as a large, hairy humanoid, he said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Over 7 feet tall, with a powerful build and an almost human-like intelligence. Tom, more skeptical, chuckled. "It's probably just a bear or a trick of the light," he said. But as the night wore on and the forest grew silent, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next day, we began our search in earnest. Mark was determined to find evidence, and his enthusiasm was contagious. We trekked through dense underbrush, crossing streams and climbing rocky outcrops. The deeper we went, the more isolated we felt. Around midday, we stumbled upon a series of large footprints in the mud. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, massive, with a distinct shape that couldn't be attributed to any known animal. Mark was ecstatic. "This is it," he exclaimed. "We're on the right track." We followed the prints for miles, but they eventually disappeared into the rocky terrain. Despite the setback, Mark remained optimistic. "We'll set up cameras here," he decided. "If Sasquatch is out there, we'll catch it on film." That night, as we reviewed the footage from our trail cameras, we noticed something strange. In one of the clips, there was a shadowy figure moving through the trees. It was too indistinct to identify, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. Tom tried to rationalize it. "Could be anything," he said, though he sounded less certain. We decided to stay another night, hoping for clearer evidence. On the third day, the forest seemed to change. The air was thick with tension, and an eerie silence had settled over the area. We continued our search, but there was a sense of foreboding that none of us could shake. Late in the afternoon, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trees. We froze, hearts pounding, straining to see through the dense foliage. Then, a large figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sasquatch. The creature was massive, standing at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes glowed with an unsettling intelligence, and it moved with a grace that belied its size. For a moment, we were too stunned to react. Mark, ever the scientist, raised his camera, but the Sasquatch let out a deafening roar, sending us into a panic. We turned and ran, the creature hot on our heels. The forest blurred around us as we stumbled through the underbrush, the sound of heavy footsteps closing in. We reached the camp, breathless and terrified. "We have to leave," I urged, but Mark was adamant. "This is the proof we've been looking for," he insisted. "We can't just walk away." As night fell, we barricaded ourselves in the tent, hoping the flimsy fabric would somehow protect us. The forest outside was unnaturally quiet, amplifying our fear. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig set our nerves on edge. Around midnight, the ground shook with heavy footsteps. The Sasquatch was back, its growls sending shivers down my spine. It circled the tent, its silhouette casting a monstrous shadow. We held our breath, praying it would leave us alone. Suddenly, the creature let out a blood-curdling scream and lunged at the tent, tearing through the fabric with its massive claws. We scrambled out, adrenaline surging through our veins. Mark tried to reason with it, holding out his hands in a futile gesture of peace. But the Sasquatch was relentless. It swiped at Mark, sending him crashing into the underbrush. Tom and I could only watch in horror as the creature advanced on him, its eyes filled with fury. Realizing there was no time to waste, I grabbed Tom's arm and pulled him towards the trail. "We have to go, now," I shouted. We ran through the darkness, the sounds of Mark's screams echoing behind us. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest a never-ending maze. Exhaustion began to set in, but the fear of the Sasquatch kept us moving. Eventually, we stumbled upon an old ranger station, abandoned but intact. It was our only hope. We barricaded the door and collapsed inside, panting and drenched in sweat. "Do you think it will find us?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my own fear barely contained. "But we can't stay here forever." The hours crawled by, every creak and groan of the old building amplifying our anxiety. Just when we thought we might be safe, we heard it, the heavy footsteps, the growl that signaled the creature's approach. Tom and I shared a look of pure terror. "We need to signal for help," he said, fumbling with the emergency flare we found in a supply closet. We climbed to the roof, the flare in hand, and sent a bright, red beacon into the night sky. The Sasquatch roared in anger, its eyes fixed on us. It began to climb the building, each step shaking the structure. We backed away, the flare our only weapon. As the creature reached the edge of the roof, a helicopter's searchlight pierced the darkness. Rescue had arrived. The Sasquatch hesitated, its eyes narrowing. With a final, enraged roar, it retreated into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. Tom and I were rescued, but the ordeal left scars that would never heal. Mark was never found, his fate a tragic mystery. We gave our statements to the authorities, but they were skeptical, attributing our experience to hysteria and wild animals. But I knew the truth. The Sasquatch was real, and it was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. The forest held secrets, dark and ancient, that mankind was never meant to uncover. Back in the safety of civilization, I tried to return to my life, but the nightmares persisted. The glowing eyes of the Sasquatch haunted my dreams, a constant reminder of the terror we faced. The expedition changed me, leaving me with a profound respect and fear for the unknown. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some legends are more real than we can ever imagine. The Sasquatch, the guardian of the forest, was one such legend, a haunting presence that would forever linger in my mind.